And good morning, everyone, and welcome this morning to our session, Where Do We Go From Here? I'm Bob Morrison, and it's indeed a pleasure to be with you this morning, and I'm really grateful to everyone at Louisiana Music Educators Association for inviting me to spend some time with you here this morning to talk about where do we go from here? Now, before we get started, I just want to set some ground rules for this morning. First of all, there's a lot of information that I want to cover, and we've got a limited amount of time. So I encourage you to use the chat, but I want you to know that I'm not going to be able to answer questions during the session. However, I will be reviewing the chat afterwards. So I'm always interested in your comments, thoughts, ideas, questions. Also, you see my email address here. Feel free to email me any information, any questions that you have following this survey. Also, I'll be talking about a lot of resources, and this is the link to a drive that has all of the resources that I'm going to be touching on today, and they'll also drop a copy of the link into the offers section as well. So you don't have to worry about trying to keep up with the different things that I'm talking about or the different resources. All of the resources, tools, reports, studies, everything will be at this URL, so you can just go in, grab them, and use them to your heart's content. So with that, I want to get started. It's important to understand that what we do right now will have an impact on what comes next, and that this will indeed have a direct impact on how we as a community emerge from this crisis. And it's a crisis of epic proportions. But today, I'm not going to dwell on where we have been. We need to turn our focus towards what's happening in the coming school year and how we will emerge greater and stronger and more vibrant as a community when it does. But first, I want to review the components because this will set the stage for the conversation that we'll have today. When I first started talking about COVID-19 back in the spring, I likened this pandemic to a two-headed monster. The first head of this monster was the public health crisis. This is the virus and how it's raging across the nation, changing everything in our lives and how we are able or unable to interact with other people. And it's broadly impacted our ability to teach our music programs. Now, the second head is the fiscal crisis. This is how efforts to contain the virus have increased our unemployment, driven people to food banks, seen our businesses shutter permanently. And I'm not talking about the stock market. I'm talking about the economy, small businesses, the backbone of our nation. Many of these businesses that have shut may never reopen. And if you just walk down any street, any main street of any town, you will see what I mean. Now, this spring and summer, I thought of this as only a two-headed monster, but a new head has grown, and that is the mental health crisis. And make no mistake, this third head that is impacting all aspects of our lives is something we need to pay close attention to. We see this in our students, in our families across the nation, and as months give way to tragic month of not being in school, of not having milestones, of not seeing friends and family, of not having our music and arts programs, our students are significantly impacted. Long after this virus has been tamed and the economy begins to recover, the mental health aspect of this crisis will continue to impact our nation, our schools, our students, and our music programs. Knowing this is important because this will help guide us on how we respond, on how we proceed, on how we take action, and ultimately on how we will rise as a community. And how we take action will be judged not by us, but by history. And make no mistake, history has its eyes on us right now. What we do now will be judged decades from now. What we do now will be talked about a century from now. Which begs the question, where do we go from here? So what I'd like to do is talk about some things as it relates to short-term and long-term, and I want to spend a few minutes addressing each of the heads of the monster that we just talked about. And the first one is addressing the health crisis. This is the part of the crisis, the virus, that has impacted our programs the most. It is what has forced our programs out of schools. It is what has created this narrative in some places that our programs are no longer safe to conduct. These are the issues that are creating the biggest challenges for us, and these are the issues of which we have some great information that you should be able to use. But first and foremost, it's really important to understand this point, that there has been no scholastic performing arts spread of COVID-19 anywhere. None. No scholastic spread in our K-12 schools has occurred with COVID-19. So it's important to understand this. But we have the benefit of something other folks do not have the benefit of, and that's research. Because the National Federation of State High School Associations and the College Band Directors National Association came together to form a coalition to create an aerosol study because of their concerns back in March about the fact that there were issues with our instruments, issues with singing that we needed to address through research. And what I want to share briefly with you are the findings from the third round 3 of the aerosol study that was released just a few days ago, because I think this is really important into how we will be able to proceed with our programs in the near term. And make no mistake, even though there's been an announcement of a vaccine and they're talking about the timing of the vaccinations, we are going to be operating our programs like this into the summer and possibly into the early fall. So this is part of the ticket to keeping our programs going and bringing our programs back into place. And one of the key findings to keep in mind is that instrumental, vocal, general music, theater, speech, debate, dance classes, and activities may be held in person following proper mitigation. Just as our students are not coming back into schools like they were in March for their regular classes, neither will they come back to their music and arts classes the same way. They're wearing masks in their classroom. They need to wear masks in the music room. We have the research to show how our programs can be done in similar fashion to other programs. And so I want to share with you some of the research, but the main point here is that if our students are in schools, the arts are in schools. So here's some of the findings. What I'm showing here is a chart showing brass instruments that are being played first without a mask, and then you're seeing the standard deviation. And then the orange bars are when they're playing with a mask on. And the bars are showing the level of aerosol generation by those instruments. And you can see how high the levels are without the masks on and the masks on the instruments, and how low it is when they put the masks on. You see the difference in the trumpet there, and the French horn, and the tuba, and the trombone. This is what it looks like for our wind instruments. Notice the oboe is the highest generator. And look at the scale, from 0 to 6. And then you look at the flute all the way at the far end on the left-hand side. Without a mask, it's very low. And then with the mask, it's even lower. When we look at singers or theatrical students or theatrical performers, same thing. With and without a mask, you see gray bars higher, orange bars lower. So that's showing us that mitigation strategies, by putting a mask on the performer, by putting a mask on the instruments, they have an impact. How much of an impact? Well, in this particular portion of the study, they identified the percent reduction in aerosol generation by putting a mask on. And it goes everywhere from 64% and 67% reduction for flute and saxophone, all the way to 98% for soprano singers. But then what's interesting for the flute, you may say, wow, that's not a lot of mitigation for the flute. But when you look at the flute, look at the scale here from 0.02 all the way to 0.2. And on the other chart, we were seeing 1 to 6. The flute, without any cover on generates the same level of aerosols as with a bell cover. You know, basically the flute does not generate any aerosols. And when you look at when somebody's sitting and reading, when someone is sitting and reading with a mask on, they're generating more aerosols than when you're sitting there playing the flute. So it's important to understand that those reference points are all based on a particular base. And because the flute is so low in aerosol generation to begin with, the reduction levels are low. What's important to understand is that the flutes and the recorders are not going to kill anybody. That people thinking that these were just spreading aerosols and germs everywhere, it doesn't happen. So to the degree that you can get your recorder programs back up and running, you should, because they don't generate aerosols. There's nothing to break apart the particles in the droplets that leads to the creation of the aerosols. So there are some mitigation strategies that you can put into place. And these, I think, are really important. First and foremost, everyone should be masked. So mask everything. Your performers, teachers, instruments, woodwind and brass players should play with the mask with a small slit on their face, as well as masking the instruments. Teachers should not be talking that much. And if you are talking, if you can have a microphone to help alleviate the loud talking necessary in the classroom, that would help. Materials matter. The quality of the materials. If you're, well-fitting mask, surgical style, washable, disposable. And for your instruments, if you have a MERV 13 type filter available, use that. A surgical mask works, but keep in mind that something is better than nothing, and non-stretchy material is the best way to go. Socially distance. Indoors, outdoors, 6 feet or more. And with your trombone players, add an additional 3 feet in front of them, so 9 feet in front of the trombonist. Outdoors, masks are recommended. Bell covers still should be used as well. And timing. If you're outdoors, you can rehearse for 30 minutes, take a break, let the air change go through, and then start again. If you're inside, rehearse for 30 minutes, but then allow for an air change to take place. And again, wear the masks, mask the instruments, socially distance, but allow that air change to clear the aerosols from the room. And oh, by the way, those plastic dividers, don't use them because they trap the aerosols in the room. And proper hygiene for yourself, proper hygiene for your hands, proper hygiene for your space, proper hygiene for your instruments, spit valves into puppy pads, hand washing and cleaning of the common areas. And then ventilation. Ventilation is the least talked about aspect of this, but it's critical that you understand the ventilation in your room, because that will tell you how quickly you can clear out the air to allow another class to take place. All this information on the research is in the drive that I set up for you, including a video of the researchers actually talking about this iteration of the study. But like I said before, if the arts are in schools, our students should be in schools as well. And we also have the September Ready report, which is the guidance from the state of New Jersey that we put forward for you to utilize as well. Also in the Dropbox on how you can use proper mitigation strategies for not only music, but all performing arts programs as well. Lastly, when you're talking to your administrators, arts education has more research on mitigation strategies than any other content area. Ask them where the research is on how they're bringing students back into the classroom. Ask them where the research is on how they're conducting athletics programs. We have the data to show this is how our programs can come back in a way that reduces risk for our students. And remember, there is no zero risk. Now, the next part of the monster that I want to talk about is addressing the mental health crisis. And this is really important because it was emerging prior to the pandemic, and it's certainly raging right now. And one of the things to keep in mind is that social emotional learning is going to be front and center for all of our students and all of our schools. And we need to address it. And we need to be prepared to show how, as music educators, we can use our programs in a way that will specifically address the mental health needs, the social emotional learning needs of our students. So what is social emotional learning? Well, social emotional learning, defined by Castle, is the process through which children and adults acquire and effectively apply knowledge and skills that are necessary to develop self-awareness, develop healthy identities, develop self-management, understanding and managing one's emotions, social awareness, achieve and personal and collective goals, and feel and show empathy for others. Relationship skills, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and responsible decision making, how to make responsible and caring and equitable decisions. So a lot of this information, or a lot of the research, is really documented here in this report that was from the National Commission on Social, Emotional, and Academic Development. It's called From a Nation at Risk to a Nation at Hope. And this report came out a few years ago. And in this report, it talks about all the recommendations. And one of the recommendations that it says was to change instruction to teach social, emotional, and cognitive skills, and to embed these skills in academic and school-wide practice, to intentionally embed these skills in school-wide practice. Another report came out just 18 months ago from the University of Chicago called Arts Education and Social Emotional Learning Outcomes Among K-12 Students, Developing a Theory of Action. And underneath that particular report, there was a research study called Foundations for Young Adult Success, a developmental framework, which talked about the fact that developmental experiences plus developmental relationships are the cornerstone, the bedrock to youth development, successful youth development in our country. So along with that, they had this theory of action called Action and Reflection Process, which had these attributes of encounter, tinker, choose, practice, and contribute under the action side, and then describe, evaluate, connect, envision, and integrate under the reflection side. When you think of that, do you see arts education in these words? Do you see music education? Do you see your program in these words? I know that I do, and you should too. So why might arts educators and music educators have an advantage with developmental relationships? Well, that's easy. We see our students more often than anyone else. In the elementary school, we see them from the time they come in kindergarten or first grade, all the way till they leave in 5th or 6th grade to go on to middle school. Same thing with middle school. We see them more frequently than others. So that gives us an advantage because we just spend more time with them. And why might we have an advantage as it relates to developmental experiences? Well, that's simple. We create developmental experiences in our classroom. You do it all the time. You see, music education by its very nature is social. Music education by its very nature is emotional. And it's important to understand that, and that you create these opportunities in your classroom. And actually, social emotional learning is so important that in the Arts is Essential document that came out by NAFME and the other professional arts education associations a few months ago, they led with arts education supports the social and emotional well-being of students, whether through distance learning or in person. So this is a critical tool in our toolbox. But for it to be effective, it has to be embedded, it has to be intentional, and it has to be sustained. It's not something that we just do and say, okay, we're going to stop for a moment and do social emotional learning. It has to be integrated in what you are doing. So that begs the question, how might we embed SEL into our practices, into our work? And so what we did in New Jersey is we have our competencies, social emotional learning competencies and sub-competencies adopted by the state around what we talked about earlier, self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, responsible decision-making, and relationship skills. And there are 19 sub-competencies underneath each of those. And in New Jersey, we adopted our variation of the national standards for arts education, including the artistic processes of creating, performing, responding, and connecting, and the 11 anchor standards underneath those. So we thought, well, what would we do to create something that would integrate social emotional learning and these competencies? And so we decided we would mush them together. And that's what we did. We mushed everything together here in this Reese's Peanut Butter Cup. And we put the social emotional learning as the chocolate and the artistic processes are the peanut butter. And when we put them all together, we created this matrix of more than 200 intersections between arts education and social emotional learning. And this is what it looked like in the area of create. We identified new essential questions and enduring understandings about how to connect the two, including how does the awareness of one's strengths, challenges, feelings, and thoughts influence the generation of creative ideas? That's the intersection. And so then what we did is we did it for all 200 plus of those intersections. and then created a website called selarts.org. Again, all the resources are in the drive that we've shared with you. And on this website, you see these various intersections between the artistic process and the social emotional learning competencies. And as you go into the website and click on, it will bring you down to an area to show you what the EUs and EQs are for each of them, as well as to show you example lessons that support each of them. And we also include the grade-banded social emotional learning indicators for each of the 19 sub-competencies, which shows you the difference between what an elementary student would look at when you think of recognizing one person's feelings and thoughts versus how it would be approached at the high school level. Very different ways of approaching it, and we have these indicators embedded there for you. We've also created, with Dr. Scott Egger and myself, a brochure advocating for music education through social emotional learning. And we've also dropped in a copy of an article that Dr. Maurice Elias, one of the founding fathers of social emotional learning, and I did for the New Jersey School Boards Association just recently. And in the file is also a webinar that we did with the folks at Castle who oversee social emotional learning in the United States, talking about transformative SEL, using SEL as a lever to address equity and justice in the United States. So some great tools in there for how you can utilize it. But remember, it has to be embedded, it has to be intentional, and it has to be sustained. And in closing on this part of it, Maurice Elias once said recently, "I believe that everyone will soon come to realize that our arts educators are the secret weapon to the implementation of social emotional learning in our schools. You are our secret weapon with superpowers that are embedded in the arts, and you need to embrace that." So, what about the third head, the fiscal crisis? Well, we all know that there is a looming fiscal crisis out there for public education. There has not been a federal backfill. We don't know what the budget is going to look like for the coming years, and that raises threats to what things are going to look like for the 2021-2022 school year. So how do we address the fiscal crisis? Well, it's going to be the same way that we address the health crisis and the same way we address the mental health crisis. We do so through advocacy. We have to get organized. We have to be prepared to advocate on behalf of our programs. And not only us, we have to organize others to help us. Think of it in terms of this way. Proactive is better than reactive, and reactive is better than inactive or doing nothing. Right now, we have to be proactive. And it's like the old metaphor. When was the best time to plant a tree? Probably 20 years ago, right? The next best time to plant a tree is today. And the same thing is true for advocacy. We have to prepare now for the 2021 school year right now. We have to prepare now. And what I'm suggesting for you is not something where I'm giving you some advice that I wouldn't use myself. This is the work that we are doing right now in New Jersey as part of our Arts Ed Now effort. And I'm going to share what we're doing right now with you because I think everyone should be doing this right now. The first thing is get informed. Know what's going on in your school district. Survey all your educators, gather data by parish, identify what's happening and what themes are emerging. Identify the concerns, the strengths, and the needs from the field, and then analyze the information and develop a plan. You have to get informed before you can take action. So do some legwork right now. We're in the field right now with a survey in New Jersey to all of our arts educators to help us understand what's going on so we can develop our plans. Second of all, get organized in your own community and as a state in all 70 of the districts plus the charter schools. Develop advocates for arts education in every single district. That's what we're doing here in New Jersey. We're setting up campaigns in every single district using parents and concerned citizens to help our arts educators, our music educators. Use your band parent booster groups as a point of organizing if you have them in your community. Other students and concerned citizens, but organize to build community of support. Understand the budget process, how funding is happening. Organize local groups through communication, email, Facebook groups, etc. Hold training sessions for your teams on Zoom. And then develop your message. We're developing messages around the things we talked about today, the safe implementation of our programs, that social emotional learning connections are critical for our students. To support the budget so that we have staffing, curricular support, and scheduling in place. And learning expectations for our students have not been changed. Music and arts education remain a core subject. And that if our kids are in schools, that the arts are in schools. And we're organizing our champions. We're actually meeting with them on Monday and then again in early December so that we can launch a campaign in January to make sure our programs are protected and that we keep our music and arts programs in our schools. We cannot allow the bad behavior that has occurred during the pandemic to be institutionalized. And the only way that we can do that is we have to speak out, we have to organize, and we have to demand that our programs be taken with the seriousness from which you all conduct them. We have to organize now to ensure our programs for tomorrow.
These are undoubtedly historic times that we are living in. And as many of you know, I am a student of history. And as such, I'd like to share with you a quote that, regardless of the challenges we face, always serves as a reminder about the importance of our profession. And it goes like this. I must study politics and war, that my sons may have liberty to study mathematics and philosophy, in order to give their children a right to study painting and poetry, music, architecture, statuary, tapestry, and porcelain. These were the famous words of John Adams in a letter to his wife Abigail on May 12, 1780, and it always reminds me of the connection between music and arts education and the original vision for our nation. George Washington played flute duets with his niece. Thomas Jefferson famously practiced the violin for hours on end. Abraham Lincoln carried his harmonica around with him in his pocket and played for anyone who would listen. Winston Churchill, when during World War II was told to cut the arts, explained, "Then what are we fighting for?" Martin Luther King learned piano in his youth and spoke of equity and justice. Bill Clinton said, "I would not be president without my school music program." And the late, great John Lewis said,
"Without music, the civil rights movement would have been like a bird without wings."
Would have been like a bird without wings. It is during these challenging times, indeed these historic times, that I am inspired by their actions and by their words. So, the next time someone tries to tell you that what you do is not essential, well, you just remind them that you're doing exactly what George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, John Adams and Abraham Lincoln, Winston Churchill and Bill Clinton, Martin Luther King and John Lewis all said you should be doing. Because the way I see it, there can be no greater calling than fulfilling the dreams of our founding fathers, and to do so as music educators. And in spite of our challenges, there's no better place to be a music educator than right here in the United States. Every day you are teaching music, you are living the dreams of our founding fathers by providing a right to study music to our students. It's now up to all of us to work together to keep their dreams alive so that we may pass it on to the next generation, so that they will in turn pass it on to the generation after that. Yes, these are the dreams of our founding fathers, and we must all work through these current challenges to keep their dreams alive. Thank you for all that you do. And remember, history has its eyes on us.